Hey, it's Pastor Pete here. In an earlier video, my one before this, my first one, commentary video, I shared clips of Rick Warren and Tim Keller sharing their views on recent broad cultural trends, but then also cultural trends within the institutional church. Today, I want to take that thinking, those observations, a bit further or deeper by bringing in now the teaching of a philosopher who has been pointing out the social mechanisms of that problem for some time. As I mentioned before, I kind of have a sociology background, and or at least that's what lights my fire when it comes to analyzing things. Deep dives into biblical languages or doctrinal theology do not excite me in the same way that this does, relational stuff. So what I want to start with, in case people haven't seen the other one, is what I think of as the gold nugget clips from the previous video. And then I'll move into the next layer of it. So here goes the first clip.
That the church is not able to form its own young people growing up. The world is catechizing them in a way that we're not. And then secondly, even the way we do apologetics and evangelism, I think it's just going to have to, it's just going to have to change.
Yes.
And it's not just a cultural shift, actually. There's a cultural breakdown, which maybe we want to talk a little bit about. That therefore older ways of doing evangelism and Christian formation, I think, are in this country are becoming obsolete. Mm-hmm. And so the truth is not, we're not going to change the truth, but how we impart it, how we shape people with it, how we recommend it.
So that's Tim Keller saying that ways we have been doing evangelism and the ways the church has been doing faith formation in its people are becoming obsolete. I would say he's late to that observation, but maybe I'm claiming some super insight there that that's not fair and maybe egotistical as well. So what this all says to me is that the culture of the world is shaping us more than the church is. The Christian church, as an institution, needs to radically re-examine how its adherents are shaped and formed in all of life. So not just focusing on how they're shaped and formed by what the church does, but by how these other forces work on their adherents to shape their thinking in a way that might be contrary to the core teachings of the church. And I take from this, they need more than ever to be inoculated, a word that's big these days, regarding the viral values distortion of truth that the broader culture brings. So I may be expanding, I may be interpreting a little bit what Tim Keller says there, but that's what I hear in that, and that's partly why when I first saw it, it got me pretty enthusiastic. Now we'll go to the Rick Warren gold nugget clips.
The biggest change that I have seen in our society is this. Christians no longer get their primary identity from either Jesus or the church.
So I have to insert myself there a moment. I at one point had it cut so that the church part wasn't even in there, and realized that I did that because I see those two as different. So the forming of Jesus and the scriptures and the Holy Spirit, and the forming by the church of the church for its institutional needs, for me, in my view of things, are distinctly different things. And so, but it's still significant that Rick Warren points out that neither of those are effective or are actually happening within the institutional church. It's big. Here's the next one.
Any one of those create pain, but 5 of them dumped on us at once were really the the precursor that allowed us to reap a huge harvest this year. And one of my pastors, my executive pastor, is on a call with the largest churches in America every other week. And he said, Rick, every one of those guys, they always keep talking about, they're so anxious. How do we get the church back open? How do we get the community back into the church? And that's all they're talking about. How do we get the community back into the church? I go, no. We're going to do the exact opposite. How do we get the church into the community? Okay. How do we get the church into the community? Oh, we've been closed. How is it that you have your greatest effective year evangelism and you don't have a public worship service for over a year? Huh? How is that possible? Well, it's the same possibility as the first 300 years of Christianity, where there were no church buildings and there weren't public worship services. And yet it was the greatest period of growth in the church. You get the church into the community.
So there's some of Rick Warren's take. He in the second part of the clip, he goes into more that this opportunity in COVID of re-examining the purpose of the worship event and taking it as an opportunity to focus on going out into the community rather than keeping open spaces in the pews and expecting the community to come to them. So, but both of them describe this identity finding and identity forming crisis. That's the key thing for this video. And there are people that have been saying this kind of thing for some time, maybe even since the church was born. In my own denomination, because Rick Warren points to that time, right, when there were no church buildings. In my own denomination, and particularly in my own area here in Alberta, there have been some people who have been moving away from the building and worship-centric model to a neighborhood and house focus. There are a couple of them that are taking that approach. One of those is Karen Wilk, who some years ago put out a booklet called "Don't Invite Them to Church," and I'll link to it in the notes for this video. And these are practical versions of working this out, of going to house churches, or even not having a building at all, and just having households of study and worship and fellowship. And so it's not necessarily new, but it is big to hear it from two different important Christian leaders. And so those are a practical way of approaching this. Someone else is getting more at the underpinning of this problem, kind of the invisible, as he puts it, I think in the video, under the hood workings of this, the out of sight, out of mind, out of awareness, dangers. And that person is James K. Smith, or Jamie Smith, other people refer to him as. He's a philosophy prof at Calvin University with an interesting story and a good presentation style. For about a decade, he's been working out this out in a way that seems to rise directly out of his study of St. Augustine, or Augustine, however you want to say it. So on the one hand, he has that going on. He was doing that. And his observing North American culture inside the church and outside the church particularly. And these two converge. They come together in what he's working out. There are a series of videos where he talks about this. And if you trace them over the years, it's kind of fun to watch it get refined and focused. And so this video, the clips I have are from, I think it was 2016. I remember when I first encountered his ideas around 2012, I was baffled, and I actually felt threatened when I first started hearing about them publicly. See, I have this thing about ritual, and I know that it's out of proportion, and I'm still exploring why that might be, but I have great difficulty with repetitive ritual. and even more great difficulty when nobody knows the meaning of it. And so that's all different subject matter. But I have this thing about ritual. So to have a guy saying that we need to pay attention to ritual and liturgy and we need to bring those back in formative ways into the church, at first I just did not understand. And I thought he was the enemy within, so to speak. But he calls the church to pay more attention to this ritual and liturgy in all of life, what he calls liturgy. So it's not the narrow church or a church or sequence of events in a church service liturgy. It's a bit broader than that. And they're the very things that most of my life I've wanted to get rid of, until I realized that it's impossible. You might have a non-scripted liturgy, but even the non-scripted so-called off-the-cuff impulse people start following repeated patterns again and again and again. I've observed that in myself. So, but each time I encountered his thought over the years since then, I started to understand more of what he's getting at. And I hear what he is getting at spoken of by Rick Warren and Tim Keller as well. I do not know how much they know of Smith's work, but there's a connection there. And I'm a person that seems to have a knack for connecting things that other people don't see as connected. So let me run the first clip where Jamie Smith is presenting again the gold nugget of his ideas at that point.
It also means, by the way, that our loves acquire direction and orientation, what I'm aimed at, what I'm pursuing, what I hunger for, because over time we become immersed in practices and rituals that are forming and shaping and training my heart in certain ways. Think of it this way: your loves are more caught than taught. Your loves are recruited by practices and rhythms and rituals that you give yourself over to. And I want to sort of reclaim an old word to name those love-shaping practices. I'm going to call them liturgies. Liturgies are the kinds of love-shaping, heart-directing practices and habits and rhythms that shape you in ways that, now here's the important part, you might not be realizing. So not only are our habits unconscious and operating sort of under the hood, so to speak, but it also means that the very process by which you are acquiring that orientation, that disposition, those hungers, is also unconscious and often covert. And this is especially the case when we don't recognize cultural practices and rhythms as the liturgies that they are. When we imagine that they're just benign cultural things that we do, and we don't realize that they are doing something to us. So consider the implications of this for the fact that you are lovers, that you are made to love God and love what God loves. If you think of love-shaping practices as liturgies, right? What you love is in a way what you worship, what you ascribe worth to, what you think is ultimate, what you want to enjoy. If love-shaping practices are liturgies, what that also means is you could be worshiping other gods without even realizing it. You wouldn't even be aware in some ways of all the ways that your heart has been captivated by rival gospels. That's because the kinds of cultural liturgies I'm talking about aren't just one-off events that you do. They are more specifically formative practices that are doing something to you. They are, you could say, sometimes we don't even realize all the ways that our hearts are being taught to sing the songs of Babylon rather than the songs of Zion.
So when he talks about cultural observations or observing culture, that's also, as a sociology background guy, but it's not just sociology, that's the academic cover for it. As a guy who in his childhood moved a lot and had to learn to read the culture of a new place very quickly to see where I could fit in, where we could fit in. and just how things worked. That childhood necessities kind of become a lifelong interest of cultural observation. And so when I hear him say this, that it's more caught than taught, I immediately had stories that came to mind that were filed away for me, and that illustrated that very thing. And so here's one of the stories. I was invited to attend a junior hockey game with the boys' clubs of all the Reformed churches of the region, and it was kind of neat. Most of them were in uniform. There was a special announcement made that the group was there, and I remember that the ceremonial puck dropping was done, and I don't remember his name, but an important professional hockey player who had later come out with his story of having been abused by a coach in his junior years, and dealing with everything that came out of that. And this guy dropped the puck, the ceremonial puck dropping, and then he came over to where the boys' club was, and he threw the puck over the glass, and one of the boys caught it, and it was an exciting moment. It was moving for me. Like, it was just, there's something there, right? But all of that is a ritual, and so then I like to think, why does this move me? And so that was all good and fine. But then later in the game, one of the things I've learned about junior hockey particularly is that the crowds come to see a fight. And they get increasingly restless. Maybe it's just one particular area, could be an exception, but I doubt it. And so the crowd gets more and more restless when a fight doesn't happen. And there was one young fellow playing that had caught my eye, I think particularly because he looked like an amalgamation of my three sons. Even my son-in-law was in there somewhere, and he was playing well. And then I saw the coach talk to him towards the end of the third period and give him an instruction on the bench there, and I saw his face change. And then he went out and he picked a fight with somebody. And his body language to me was complete reluctance. Like, oh man, we got to do this, give the crowd their money's worth, their $2.50's worth. And that was bothering me, seeing that happen. But then when the punches started flying and the boys group was out of their seats calling for blood, what's in Smith's language, what's the liturgy there, right? And how is that liturgy shaping them? I had never seen kids that excited in church. That bothered me. That always bothers me. If they only understand the real message of the church, they'd be on their feet as well, I would say. So that really troubled me, to the point where I said to the leaders, thank you for the invite, and if I'm here at this time next year, I will decline, because I saw that as a contradiction with our values, and nobody was interfering with their pleasure at this fight breaking out, and in terms of my values, there's something wrong with that, so I will not be able to participate. Okay, so. But here's where I have a problem with Smith as well still. I try to re-examine the liturgies, the religious practices, I'll call it, of the church when I was growing up, and I haven't really been able to think of one that formed me, or formed me positively, right? Like even communion, one of our main liturgies, was just this terribly solemn event, kind of fearful even. And yeah, sure, it was mysterious, but I don't understand. I didn't see a shaping influence, because it was something so apart from real life. That's why I often, in cases like that, will argue that pizza, and we should just go out for pizza and beer and say a few things that honestly honor Jesus and celebrate him, And that would probably be a more authentic communion, maybe even to what the New Testament agape feast was like, than what we did in the church as I was growing up. So this is a problem I still have, why I still resist this whole idea of doubling down on ritual and liturgy. Now I'll let Smith give a few of his examples, and this is the longest clip in this commentary video, but it's worth every moment.
And sometimes that's because we are actually overly concerned about the messages and ideas in culture, and we miss all of the liturgies of culture that are recruiting us to a rival story. Some cultural practices, then, are training your loves in ways that you might not be aware of. That's why you might not love what you think. This isn't because some message has changed your mind. It's not because you've been hoodwinked by a bad idea. It's because a rival liturgy has captured your heart. Let me give you one example. It's in your pocket. So this epiphany for me, so I don't want you to think I only watch Russian films and beer commercials, but however, I've had two huge epiphanies watching Russian films and a beer commercial. Sadly, is this really bad to talk about at Wheaton College? I don't know. All of a sudden, I'm really nervous that the president is setting it. It just happens. Didn't go looking for it. I was just watching television. This beer commercial comes on. Sadly, it was a Michelob Ultra commercial. Friends, if you ever backslide, please don't do it with Michelob Ultra. So here's what's fascinating. As you know, some of our most brilliant creative minds in our culture work in marketing, right? This is why you have to watch carefully. Here's what happens in this beer commercial. Now, remember, it's a beer commercial, so almost de facto, it is horribly sexist, right? So I'm just naming that from the beginning. It's the end of a workday. 4 bros, basically, come walking out of the office, right? It's the end of the day. They need to blow off some steam, so they walk out of their office building, come up to the curb. It's time for this guy to carpool home. They come to his car. They meet his car at the curb. It's a terrible car. It's like a totally lame car. Who wants to drive this car? Nobody wants to drive that car. So what do? Magically, the car of their dreams, a Jaguar F-Type, is sitting there, and they get in and they're off. Magically cut to a different scene. They're at the beach. Remember, I told you this is a fantasy world. It's a beer commercial. They're at the beach. Off in the distance are some young ladies that they think maybe they are interested in. They might be interested in them, but they're not sure. It's a long ways off, so what do? Oh, all of a sudden, these young women are right there talking to them. And of course, they're interested in them because they're drinking Michelob Ultra, which is the magic, so on and so forth. Cut scene again. We're in the club. Up on the stage is the DJ. There's something playing that they really don't want to listen to. It's really lame music. Who wants to be bored by that? And so what do? All of a sudden, everything they want is on stage on their terms, and they get to listen to it. And I'm watching this, and I realize this is a philosophical analysis of culture. Why? Because, of course, these little ritual moves are the moves that we make when we caress our iPhones, right? Steve Jobs was a master of desire. And he knew the power of the affect of touch. And so what you start to realize is, okay, what's going on in the story of this 30-minute, this is a 30-second slot, right? What's going on is you realize that these gentlemen who have been living their lives with this little micro-liturgy of how they interact with the phone, it's actually trained them to relate to the entire world in that way. How? What's going on? Well, the little micro-liturgy of interacting with this is by tapping, touching, swiping, caressing, whatever, however we want to put it. This little machine is an egoism engine. It subtly and covertly and tacitly, but powerfully, has co-opted me into a vision of the world and a view of the good life, which has taught me I should never be bored. I should never be not the center of attention. I should never be dissatisfied with anything. The entire world should be available to me on my terms, when I want it, on the terms in which I set it, and everything should be available to me as the center of the universe. In other words, I don't care. Notice, we haven't said a word about the content of what you're looking at on your phone. You could be, in a sense, you could be reading the Gospel Coalition website all day long, but the thing is, the way we interact, I'm talking about the form of the practice by which I interact with the little liturgy that comes with my interaction with this device effectively keeps making me the center of the world. And so you end up practicing an egocentric understanding of the cosmos rather than a theocentric orientation to the God who has made the cosmos. And it's not because I necessarily received bad ideas from this little device. It's because it has co-opted me into a liturgy, a ritual, a set of rhythms and practices that have covertly and tacitly taught me to love me, myself.
I debated with myself putting in a screen of about 60 seconds that just said, think about that. Think of your own examples of that. These are things that we just learn, that we pick up from our culture. I remember being at a soccer game here in the city I live in, the professional team or the highest level team, and there was a father there with his son. Had the seats beside me, and this father was just completely into the chants and the cheers. He had never been a soccer fan before, but in his mind it seemed, and the way he explained some things to me, he was doing it for his son, to instill something in his son. And part of the frustration for him was that the son didn't really seem concerned much. He did play in a little league, a kids league kind of thing, but wasn't interested in learning about the game. The guy would ask me things about what was that call and what did that mean, and then he'd tell his son about it. What was also troubling was how drunk he would get while we were there, and I was glad when the season ended and I could buy different seats for the next year. And I also remembered a hockey game. They seem to be mainly sporting events, but we don't think about how formative they are of our values. And there too, it was a father with a young child. I think it might have been a girl, but the crowd was doing the wave. Remember when we could get together as crowds and do the wave? Why don't we do the wave in church? And he was showing his child these various things that happened that were, again, part of the ritualness of hockey, professional hockey. And so he was giving his child the sweep of how the wave worked. And then the next time it came around, encouraging her to raise her arms as well, him or her, don't remember exactly. Okay, that's formative liturgies. So that's on the face level. And do take some time to think of your own examples of how this has worked in your life, and maybe where you caught yourself doing something and you thought, wait a second, this is not me. But I want to go a little deeper on what Smith says here. So Tim Keller and Rick Warren have set up that there's a problem in that the culture is forming us more than anything else, and Tim Keller even goes further in that the formative tools that we have had in the Reformed Church are designed for a completely different time and different questions that are not existing today. And yet, and this bothers me, that we then cling so hard to those old battles, like he said in the longer video. It's evangelical church faith formation is teaching them not to be Catholic. That's but you know what, or Armenian, or whatever the theological battle was that the particular teaching tool was created around. And so I hear a call in there for new teaching tools, but then also an equipping of the church to see what the cultural liturgies do to us in that shaping way that Smith is talking about, that we absorb easily unless we're conscious, unless we're alert, unless we're trained to see the danger of it. And so I take his example a little deeper. He ends up on the egoism angle, but just think about theological implications of a world in which a swipe can make it a better world. And the values that conveys, even if it's just in a beer commercial, that's sort of a fantasy, right? But still, we live that out to some degree. He's not off on that. And what does that say about boredom or suffering or struggle? Here I could bring in Jordan Peterson, who's one of the messengers of struggle has value for us, and we better learn to value it. And parents who protect their child from every struggle create children that don't know how to struggle, and so they swipe. So you see the value conflict there between kingdom of God values, I'll say, the Jesus values, and the values that are brought to us by our cultural patterns. I've never been one who advocates for this withdrawing from the world to protect ourselves from that. And I've been a strong advocate, even in cases where in schools certain books were being forbidden and all that kind of thing, of no, teach our children to engage and to reflect so that they can, again, the inoculation idea, so that they can be equipped to filter and to compare the value that's being conveyed by a simple swipe improving your world instantly to the values that Jesus demonstrated and taught, and that the book of Jesus demonstrates and teaches, that no, there are times when we need to struggle. I don't go as far as Tim Keller and Rick Warren. That really struck me in their videos too, that they use the language of God doing this to us. I'm not quite there, but he does allow opportunities to come into life, I'll say it that way, that create an opportunity for us to struggle somewhat and to recognize something new in it about ourselves, about who God is. We don't, whatever that new recognition is. But if we create a world where we can just swipe that opportunity from God away, what are we creating? So, thanks for sticking it out this far. As for the rest, you know the drill. Not that important to me. What's important for me is I have this urge to talk to the screen, and I thought I might as well record it, and maybe it'll be useful for someone.